If you've ever felt underestimated, if you've ever dreamed of proving everyone wrong while serving justice to those who doubted you, hit that like button, subscribe, and get ready for one of the most satisfying transformation stories you'll hear today. What I'm about to share isn't just revenge. It's the blueprint for reclaiming your life when everyone else has already written you off. It all began on a Tuesday evening that still feels burned into my memory. I was sitting at my parents' dining table, surrounded by people who were supposed to support me, but instead seemed to take pleasure in my struggles. The familiar weight of disappointment settled in my chest as my older brother Mark recounted his latest promotion, his third in 5 years. While casually asking what new hobby I'd picked up this month, I'd been trying to build my own business for 3 years. 3 years of sleepless nights, failed experiments, and mounting credit card debt. 3 years of watching my savings dwindle while my confidence evaporated. I had tried everything: e-commerce, consulting, app development, but nothing had stuck. My efforts were scattered, my attention divided, and my results reflected that chaos. "I'm actually working on something big," I said, trying to inject some enthusiasm into my voice. "I've developed a new productivity system that could really change how people work." My father snorted from the head of the table. "Another one of your big ideas? Remember the cryptocurrency trading bot you were so excited about? How much did that cost you?" The sting of his words was familiar, but no less painful. My mother attempted to defend me weakly. "Now, John, at least he's trying. Trying isn't paying his rent," my father shot back. At Mark's age, he was already managing a department. "What have you accomplished?" Trail of failed projects and excuses. Mark smirked into his wine glass. "You know, little brother, not everyone is cut out for entrepreneurship. There's no shame in admitting that. I could probably get you an entry-level position at my company. The benefits are good." The condescension in his voice was suffocating. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks as every eye at the table watched me, waiting for my response. They expected me to make excuses, to defend myself, to promise that this time would be different. Instead, I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Thank you for dinner, Mom," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I need to go." I walked out without another word, leaving them stunned into silence. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and racing thoughts. Every failure they'd mentioned flashed through my mind, every abandoned project, every missed opportunity, every dollar wasted. They were right about one thing: my efforts had been scattered. I had been trying to do everything instead of focusing on one thing with absolute discipline. That night, as I sat in my small apartment surrounded by unfinished projects and half-written business plans, something shifted inside me. The pain of their words had burned away the last of my hesitation. I realized that my problem wasn't lack of motivation or even lack of ability, it was lack of focus. I had been allowing distractions to dictate my days, responding to every interruption, chasing every shiny object, and wondering why I never made real progress. I pulled out a blank notebook and wrote at the top of the first page, 90 days of disappearance. Below it, I wrote a single sentence that would become my mantra for the next 3 months. You do not need more motivation. You do not need another plan. You do not need better timing. What you need is removal. The next morning, I began implementing what would become my protocol of transformation. I didn't announce it to anyone. I simply began. The first step was withdrawal, not from responsibility or courage, but from distraction. I deleted all social media apps from my phone. I set up an autoresponder on my email explaining that I would be unreachable for the next 90 days. I turned off notifications on everything except my alarm clock. The first few days were brutal. My mind, addicted to constant stimulation, rebelled. I found myself reaching for a phone that no longer buzzed with notifications. I paced my apartment, feeling restless and anxious without the usual flood of messages and updates. The silence was deafening at first, filled with the echoes of my own doubts and fears, but I persisted. Each morning I woke before dawn and sat in silence for 30 minutes, allowing my mind to settle. Then I would review my definite aim, building a productivity system. Based on the principles of deep work and focused attention, plan my day around 3 key tasks that would move me closer to that goal. The second week brought a new challenge. The concerned calls from friends and family who hadn't heard from me. My phone rang constantly with numbers I recognized. My mother left tearful voicemails asking if I was okay. My brother sent angry texts accusing me of being selfish and irresponsible. I resisted the urge to respond. Every explanation would invite debate, and debate drains decision. Silence became my declaration. Obedience to purpose required no witness. By the third week, something remarkable began to happen. Restlessness subsided, replaced by a growing sense of clarity. Without the constant interruption of notifications and obligations, my mind began to settle into a rhythm of focused work. I was making more progress in a single day than I had previously made in a week. The fourth week brought the first breakthrough. While working on my productivity system, I had an insight that connected all my previous failed attempts into a cohesive framework. The problem wasn't the individual projects, but the scattered approach to them. What if I could create a system that helped others avoid the same trap? I worked feverishly, fueled by excitement and clarity. Days blurred into nights as I refined the concept, built prototypes, and tested the system on myself. The results were astonishing. My productivity tripled, then quadrupled. Ideas flowed more freely. Solutions to problems that had stumped me for months suddenly became clear. Around the 6-week mark, my sister showed up at my apartment unannounced. I almost didn't answer the door, but something made me open it. Her face was a mixture of anger and concern. "Do you have any idea how worried everyone is?" she demanded, pushing past me into my apartment. "Mom's been calling me every day crying. Dad thinks you've had some kind of breakdown." "I'm fine," I said calmly. "I'm just focused on something important." "Important?" She scoffed, looking around at the whiteboards covered in diagrams and notes. "More important than your family? It's more important than letting people know you're alive." I needed to remove distractions, I explained. 90 days without distraction will do more for my life than the last 5 years of scattered effort ever could. She stared at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. "That's the most selfish thing I've ever heard. You don't just disappear on people who care about you. People who care would respect my need to focus," I countered. "People who care would understand that sometimes progress demands absence." The conversation went nowhere and she left in a huff, threatening to involve the authorities if I didn't come to my senses. I knew I had crossed a point of no return with my family, but surprisingly, I felt no guilt, only resolve. By the 8th week, my productivity system was taking shape. I had developed a comprehensive framework that combined time management, focus techniques, and habit formation into a single protocol. I began documenting everything, creating a detailed guide that others could follow. The work was exhilarating. For the first time in years, I felt aligned with my purpose. Every action had meaning. Every task moved me closer to my goal. The peace that came from this alignment was more satisfying than any temporary pleasure I had sacrificed. In the 10th week, I received an email from my landlord threatening eviction if I didn't pay the rent that was now 2 months overdue. Panic flared in my chest as I checked my bank account, $127.42 to my name. For a moment, the old doubts crept in. Maybe my family was right. Maybe I was being irresponsible, chasing another fantasy that would leave me broken. But then, I remembered the principle, readiness is produced by action, not before it. Instead of allowing fear to paralyze me, I channeled that energy into action. I spent the next 3 days refining my productivity system into a marketable online course, recording videos, creating worksheets, and building a simple website. On day 71, I launched the course with no marketing, no announcement. Just a quiet release to a small email list I had maintained from a previous project. I went to bed that night with $127.42 in my bank account and an uncertain future. The next morning, I woke to find that I had made 12 sales overnight, $594 in revenue. It wasn't enough to cover the rent, but it was proof that the system worked, that what I had created had value. Over the next 2 weeks, sales continued to grow. Word of mouth spread. By day 85, I had made enough to cover my rent and pay off my most pressing debts. By day 90, the course had generated over $10,000 in revenue, But the financial success was secondary. To what had happened internally, the 90 days of disappearance had reshaped my identity. I was no longer the scattered dreamer chasing multiple opportunities. I had become the disciplined creator who could bring a single vision to life through focused effort. On the morning of day 91, I reactivated my phone. The flood of messages was overwhelming. Hundreds of texts, voicemails, and emails from concerned friends, angry family members, and confused colleagues. I spent the morning responding selectively, not with explanations, but with invitations. I sent a simple email to my family, dinner at my place on Friday, 7 p.m. I have something to share. The week between my return and the dinner was surreal. Friends who had been worried now expressed admiration for my discipline. Colleagues who had dismissed my ambitions now wanted to know my secret. The world hadn't changed, but my arrangement with it had. Friday evening arrived. My family gathered in my apartment, now transformed from a chaotic workspace into a calm, orderly environment. My father looked around with grudging approval. My brother Mark maintained his skeptical expression, arms crossed defensively. I didn't serve dinner immediately. Instead, I asked them all to sit and began my presentation. I showed them the course I had created, the revenue it had generated, and the testimonials from early users. Mark's skepticism gradually turned to disbelief as I walked them through the numbers. My father's expression softened from judgment to curiosity. My mother's eyes filled with tears of relief and pride. The 90-day disappearance wasn't about escaping responsibility, I explained. It was about preparing to re-enter the world with authority. Great results don't come from doing more things. They come from doing fewer things with absolute discipline. When I finished, there was a moment of stunned silence. It was my father who finally broke it. "I apologize," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I misjudged you. I saw scattered effort where I should have recognized focused preparation." Mark looked at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. "I guess I owe you an apology, too. I thought you were just running away from responsibility." "You were right about one thing," I said to him. "I wasn't ready before. But readiness is produced by action, not before it. These 90 days of action produced the readiness I needed." The tension in the room dissolved into something resembling mutual respect. For the first time, they weren't seeing me through the lens of past failures, but through the evidence of present success. The dinner at Mark's celebration was a turning point. But it wasn't the final chapter. It was merely the first public exhibition of a power that had been forged in silence. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of opportunity, a direct consequence of the energy I had concentrated over those 90 days. The colleague from the dinner, a man named David, followed through on his corporate interest. Within a month, I signed a contract to implement the 90-day focus protocol with his entire department, a deal worth more than my previous year's scattered attempts had ever generated. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very discipline my family had called selfish obsession was now being valued at a premium by the corporate world. I had seemingly abandoned. My life began to reorganize itself around this new reality. The apartment that had once been my hermitage became a command center. I hired my first 2 employees, both of whom I found through a network of like-minded individuals I had connected with during my disappearance. People who understood the value of deep work. My days, once a desperate scramble for validation, now had a simple, unshakable rhythm. Mornings were for creation writing, developing new modules for the course, strategizing the expansion of the company. Afternoons were for connection client calls, team meetings, mentoring my new staff. Evenings were for restoration, reading, reflection, and planning the next day's single most important objective. The contrast with my old life was staggering. I remembered the exhaustion that used to grip me by nightfall, the feeling that I had been busy all day but accomplished nothing of substance. That fatigue was gone. I now understood that fatigue is not the price of labor, but the symptom of mental clutter. Clarity itself gives energy. With every distraction eliminated, every unnecessary obligation refused, my power didn't just grow. It multiplied. Of course, this newfound visibility brought with it a new set of challenges, the most persistent of which was my family. Their initial pride and respect slowly began to curdle into something more complicated. My father started calling me for advice, which was really a thinly veiled attempt to relive his own professional ambitions through my success. He'd suggest grandiose ideas for expansion, urging me to strike while the iron is hot and franchise the business immediately, to leverage this momentum before it faded. He couldn't grasp that my success wasn't a fleeting moment to be exploited, but the result of a system that required maintenance and protection. He was still thinking like a man chasing opportunities, while I had learned to become a man who attracted them. My mother's worry transformed into a constant stream of social planning. She wanted me to attend every family function, every cousin's birthday, every neighbor's barbecue. She saw my success as a ticket back into the fold of normalcy, not understanding that the very discipline that had created this success demanded I protect my time and energy as jealously as a dragon guards its gold. Each invitation I declined was met with a guilt trip, a reminder that family should come first. I would respond calmly, family does come first. That's why I'm building something that will secure our future. But right now, my purpose must come first, or there will be no future to secure. But it was Mark who posed the most interesting challenge. His condescension had evaporated, replaced by a cautious, almost reverent curiosity. He started showing up at my office unannounced, wanting to pick my brain about productivity techniques for his team. At first, I was generous, sharing principles from the protocol. But I quickly noticed a pattern. He wasn't looking to implement a system. He was looking for shortcuts. He wanted the hacks without the habit, the results without the ritual. He was trying to apply my 90-day solution to his 5-year problem of scattered leadership, expecting an overnight fix. One afternoon, he found me reviewing financial projections for the next quarter. He slumped into the chair opposite my desk, looking defeated. "I don't get it, John," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I've tried your methods. I've blocked out time. I've turned off notifications. But I'm still drowning. My team is still missing deadlines. My boss is asking why the efficiency gains you promised haven't materialized." I leaned back in my chair, studying him. "How many days in a row have you followed the protocol completely? Without exception?" He looked away. "Well, there was that emergency with the Peterson account. And then the quarterly reviews. And last week, my daughter was sick." "Mark," I said softly, "the protocol is not something you try. It's something you obey. The law of elimination is merciless. It allows no divided loyalty. You are still trying to serve your old habits and your new ambitions at the same time? You cannot serve two masters. You must choose comfort or command." He flinched at the word command. It was the same word I had used during my disappearance, a word that now seemed to carry the weight of my transformation. "So what am I supposed to do? Just disappear for 90 days? I have a mortgage. I have responsibilities. I have a family." "Responsibilities are not the enemy," I countered. "Distraction is. The path of command is quiet, but it's not empty. It requires you to withdraw not from duty, but from the noise that prevents you from fulfilling that duty with excellence. You don't need to vanish from the world. You need to vanish from the parts of the world that are diluting your power." He left that day more frustrated than enlightened. I realized then that my revenge, my transformation, had inadvertently created a new dynamic. I was no longer the failure they had to rescue. I was the master they couldn't understand. And that distance, while necessary, was also painful. The true test of my self-mastery came a few months later. I received a call that my father had suffered a minor heart attack. He was in the hospital, stable, but the family was in a panic. I dropped everything and went to the hospital. For the next 48 hours, I was fully present talking to doctors, reassuring my mother, handling the logistics. I did what needed to be done, but I noticed something profound. While my siblings and my mother were consumed by emotional chaos, making frantic calls, relaying the same information over and over, I was able to remain calm and effective. The emotional control I had forged in solitude was now serving me in crisis. I could feel the fear and concern, but I was not governed by it. I could observe the panic without surrendering to it. My father, covering in his hospital bed, watched me move through the chaos, with a quiet authority he had never seen before. On the second evening, when everyone had finally gone home and it was just the two of us, he looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated clarity. "You're different," he said, his voice weak but steady. "Not just successful, different. You're not scattered anymore." "I learned to protect my mornings as a soldier guards the gate," I told him. "The first moments of the day set the tone of command. If you lose them to distraction, the entire day follows in submission. I just applied that principle to this crisis. I protected the essential tasks and let the noise fade." He nodded slowly, a tear tracing a path down his wrinkled cheek. "I was wrong about you. I saw your withdrawal as rejection. I see now it was preparation." In that moment, the last vestiges of my need for his approval dissolved. I didn't need his words to validate my journey, but hearing them brought a sense of peace, a closing of a circle that had been open for years. The revenge was complete, not because he had admitted he was wrong, but because I had become the kind of man who no longer needed him. Tummy Father's health scare became a catalyst for the entire family. It forced them to confront their own scattered lives. Mark, seeing the calm effectiveness I had brought to the crisis, finally made a decision. 2 weeks after our father was discharged, he called me. "I'm doing it," he said, his voice resolute. "The 90-day protocol. I've talked to my boss. I'm taking a sabbatical. Not a disappearance, but a withdrawal. I'm going to use the time to implement the system from the ground up, for myself first, then for my team." I was genuinely surprised. "What changed your mind?" "Hospital," he said simply. "Watching you. You weren't busy. You were effective. You weren't reacting. You were directing. I don't want to be the man who's always putting out fires anymore. I want to be the man who prevents them from starting." I agreed to mentor him through his 90 days, not by managing him, but by holding him accountable to the principles. Our relationship shifted from rivalry to a form of apprenticeship. He struggled, especially in the beginning. The addiction to being needed, to being the busy executive, was powerful. There were days he called me, frustrated, tempted to jump back into the daily fray. "Endure it," I would tell him. "In time, silence becomes strength. The very solitude that once frightened you will become your fortress." And slowly it did. I watched him go through the same transformation I had. The restless energy gave way to focused calm. The scattered attempts gave way to systematic progress. He didn't disappear from his family or his duties, but he withdrew from the unnecessary obligations, the aimless conversations, the false urgency that had been ruling his life. The final, most satisfying payoff came exactly 1 year after my own 90-day disappearance had ended. Our family was gathered for Thanksgiving. The atmosphere was different. It was calmer, more present. My father, fully recovered, was reading a book on Stoic philosophy. My mother was engaged in a deep conversation with my sister, not worrying about everyone's plates. And Mark was still. He was just sitting, observing, comfortable in the silence. After dinner, he pulled me aside. "The results came in yesterday," he said, a quiet smile playing on his lips. "My department's efficiency is up 65%. Project completion time is down by half. Mr. Henderson didn't just give me a bonus. He's restructuring the entire company around the focus protocol. He's creating a new executive position for my chief strategy officer." He looked at me, his eyes clear and filled with a respect that had no trace of his old jealousy. "You know, when you first disappeared, I thought you were running away. I realize now you were running toward something, and you left a trail for the rest of us to follow." This was it. This was the true victory. Not the money, not the business success, not the public validation. It was the ripple effect. The revenge wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about inspiring them to become better. My 90-day disappearance hadn't just transformed my life. It had become the catalyst for my entire family's transformation. I looked around the room at my family. No longer a collection of scattered individuals, but a unit moving toward a new understanding of focus, purpose, and peace. The man who had vanished into solitude had returned not as an isolated success story, but as the architect of a new legacy. They had called my disappearance extreme. They were right. But they now understood that extreme problems require extreme solutions. And the peace of mastery, a peace they were all beginning to taste for themselves, was worth any price. The quiet satisfaction of that Thanksgiving dinner lingered, a warm ember in the aftermath of a long fire. But life, I was learning, doesn't exist in static moments of victory. It exists in the rhythm of purpose, and the rhythm demands a new beat. My company, which I had quietly named The Forge, was growing at a pace that felt both exhilarating and dangerous. The demand for our corporate training programs was exploding. We were fielding inquiries from Fortune 500 companies, from international clients, from industries I had never even considered. The success was intoxicating, but it was also a threat. I could feel the old temptation creeping back at the edges, the temptation to say yes to everything, chase every opportunity, to mistake movement for progress. The universe was testing me. It was offering me the world, but on the condition that I scatter myself across it to possess it. I remembered the law. Fortune does not reward the busy. It rewards the focused. I had built my empire on a single principle, and now I had to decide whether I would betray that principle for the sake of expansion. This internal conflict came to a head during a meeting with a potential investor, a man named Richard Sterling who represented a venture capital firm known for aggressive scaling. He was charismatic, sharp, and painted a picture of global domination that was undeniably appealing.
John.
"What you have here isn't just a business, it's a movement," he said, leaning across the polished mahogany table in his downtown office. "But movements die without fuel. We can provide that fuel. We're talking 10 million in Series A funding. We can have you in 10 countries within 2 years. We can build out an app, a subscription model, a full-blown digital ecosystem. We can turn the Forge into the next LinkedIn for productivity." The numbers he threw out were staggering. They represented a level of impact and financial security that was almost unimaginable. For a moment, I felt the old Paltha desire for more, the fear of missing out. I saw the headlines, the accolades, the proof to the world that I had truly made it. But then I closed my eyes and saw the image of my old apartment, the whiteboards covered in frantic, scattered diagrams. I felt the exhaustion of chasing a dozen ideas at once. I heard my father's voice saying, "Another one of your big ideas." I opened my eyes and looked at Sterling. "Thank you for the generous offer, Richard, but I'm going to decline." He blinked, his confident smile faltering for just a second. "Decline? I'm not sure you understand what we're offering here. This is the opportunity of a lifetime." "I understand perfectly," I replied calmly. "But the opportunity of a lifetime is also the distraction of a lifetime if it doesn't serve the definite aim. My aim is not to build the biggest company. It's to build the most effective one. Your model is about multiplication. My model is about mastery. I can't serve both." The meeting ended shortly after, with Sterling shaking his head in a mixture of disbelief and what I recognized as professional pity. He saw me as a naive idealist, a small-timer who couldn't handle the big leagues. As I walked out of his skyscraper office and back onto the bustling city street, I felt a profound sense of relief. I had passed the test. I had chosen command over comfort, purpose over popularity, the real challenge. However, was waiting for me back at my own office. My team, who had overheard whispers of the potential investment, was buzzing with excitement. When I announced that I had turned it down, the mood shifted to confusion and then to quiet dissent. David, my first hire, and a man who had become a trusted friend, was the one to voice what everyone was thinking. "John, can I be blunt?" he asked, closing the door to my office. "Are you sure about this? This wasn't just money. This was a chance to scale our impact tenfold. We're turning away the resources to help thousands, maybe millions of people, because of what a philosophy." "It's not just a philosophy, David. It's the foundation of everything we do," I explained. "The moment we take that money, we're no longer in control. Our rhythm becomes their rhythm. Our pace becomes their pace. We start building what they want, not what our clients need. We would become the very thing we teach people to overcome, a machine that values growth over depth. But we can't stay small forever, he argued. We have a responsibility to grow. We have a responsibility to remain effective, I countered. Greatness is not about accumulation. It's about elimination. We will grow, but we will grow on our terms. We will add new clients only when we can guarantee they will receive the same level of transformation as our first ones. We will expand only when we can find people who embody the principles, not just people who need a job. The conversation was difficult, but necessary. It forced me to articulate not just what we were doing, but why we were doing it. It was the first time I had to lead not just by example, but by principle in the face of external pressure. By the end of the day, the team understood, or at least respected, the decision. Our culture wasn't built on hype. It was built on a quiet certainty that was now being tested and proven. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected email. It was from Mark. The subject line was simply, "Crisis." I called him immediately. "What's wrong?" "It's Mr. Henderson," he said, his voice strained. "He's stepping down. Effective immediately." There was a shareholder revolt. They said the company was losing its innovative edge, that it had become too bureaucratic, too slow. "They're cleaning house." My first thought was of Mark. "Are you okay? Is your position safe?" "For now, I guess," he said. "But they're bringing in an outside CEO, a turnaround artist. Her name is Evelyn Reed. You've probably heard of her. She's famous for coming into companies and cutting everything that doesn't directly contribute to the bottom line. She's a shark, John, a brilliant, ruthless shark." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I had heard of Evelyn Reed. She was legendary in the business world for her laser focus and her lack of sentimentality. She was the living embodiment of the law of elimination, but without the philosophy of purpose. She eliminated for efficiency's sake, not for mastery's. "She's starting with a full operational review," Mark continued. "Every department, every project, every initiative is on the chopping block. My focus protocol. It's new. It's not a proven line-item revenue generator yet. I have a feeling it's going to be the first thing she cuts." The irony was bitter. The very system that had been lauded as the future of the company was now in jeopardy because it couldn't be easily quantified on a spreadsheet. Mark had used the protocol to build a high-performing, efficient department, but its true value was in the cultural shift. It created the focus, the clarity, the reduction of burnout. How could he put a number on that? "You need to prepare," I told him. "You need to translate the results of the protocol into the language she understands." "How?" he asked, his frustration palpable. "She doesn't care about employee satisfaction or peace of mind. She cares about profit margins and market share." "Then show her how the protocol leads to profit margins and market share," I said. "Don't talk about the philosophy. Talk about the outcomes. Reduced project completion time, increased client retention, lower employee turnover, which saves on recruitment and training costs. Every result of the protocol has a financial equivalent. You need to find it. You need to show her that your department isn't a cost center. It's the most profitable division in the company, even if the accounting doesn't show it yet." The next few weeks were a crucible for Mark. He threw himself into the work. Not with frantic energy, but with the focused discipline he had learned during his own 90-day withdrawal. He gathered data, interviewed clients, calculated the financial impact of reduced errors and faster delivery times. He was preparing for war, a battle of spreadsheets and metrics. The day of his presentation to Evelyn Reed arrived. He called me the night before, his voice steady, but filled with the weight of the moment. "I've done everything you said. The numbers are there. But I don't know if it will be enough. She's intimidating." "Remember who you are, Mark," I told him. "You are not the same man who needed my approval a year ago. You are a commander of your own department. You are not there to ask for permission. You are there to report on results. Let the data speak, and let your stillness be your strength." I didn't hear from him for 2 days after the meeting. The silence was nerve-wracking. I knew how much was at stake, not just for him, but for the legitimacy of everything we had both worked to build. Finally, on the third day, my phone rang. It was him. "Well?" I asked, unable to wait. He was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the sound of what I thought might be laughter in his voice. "She didn't just approve it," he said. "She's making it mandatory for the entire company. She's creating a new executive role, reporting directly to her, Chief Performance Officer, and she wants me to take it." I felt a surge of triumph so powerful, it almost took my breath away. "Mark, that's incredible." "That's not the best part," he said, and now the laughter was unmistakable. After the meeting, she asked me where I learned to operate with such clarity. She said most executives come in, try to defend their territory with emotion and ego. She said I presented my case with the calm assurance of a man who wasn't afraid to be wrong because he knew he was right. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I had a great teacher," he said simply. "I told her about the 90-day focus protocol. I told her about my brother, who disappeared to find himself and ended up finding a new way to live." I leaned back in my chair, a profound sense of completion washing over me. The revenge had never been about money or status. It had been about transformation. My transformation had sparked his. His transformation was now about to spark a revolution in a company thousands of employees strong. The ripple was becoming a wave. John Mark continued, his voice growing serious. "She wants to meet you. She wants to discuss bringing the Forge in to consult on the company-wide implementation. She said, and I quote, 'I don't often meet people who understand the true mechanics of power. I'd like to meet the one who taught you.' I smiled. The world had a funny way of working. I had turned down a venture capitalist who wanted to dilute my purpose for the sake of growth. And now the most ruthless, efficiency-driven CEO in the country was seeking me out on my own terms. I had not chased the opportunity. The opportunity had been attracted to my stillness. 'Tell her I'd be delighted to meet,' I said, 'but the meeting will be on my terms. It will be 90 minutes long. No phones, no interruptions. And the first 30 minutes will be spent in silence.' There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Mark laughed again, a full, hearty laugh of pure understanding. 'I'll tell her,' he said. 'I have a feeling she's going to love that.' The man who had once been mocked for his scattered efforts was now about to advise one of the most powerful women in business on the art of elimination. The brother who had been offered a pity job was now in a position to redefine the culture of an entire corporation. The revenge was complete, and in its place, something far more meaningful had begun, a legacy. The disappearance was over. The era of command had just begun. The meeting with Evelyn Reed was set for a Tuesday morning, the same sterile, intimidating skyscraper where I had met Richard Sterling. This time, however, I walked in not as a supplicant, but as a consultant. My team had advised me to bring a presentation, a slick deck with charts and graphs and testimonials. I left it all at the office. I brought only a notebook and a pen. My power was not in what I could show them, but in the quiet certainty of what I knew, her assistant, a woman with an expression of perpetual efficiency, led me into a vast corner office with a panoramic view of the city. Evelyn Reed stood by the window, her back to me, a figure of sharp lines and formidable presence. She was dressed in a tailored black suit that seemed to absorb the light around her. She didn't turn around when I entered. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. "Your brother speaks of you with a reverence usually reserved for cult leaders. I'm here to see if the devotion is justified. Reverence is a product of results," I replied, my own voice calm and even. "I'm here to discuss results." She finally turned, and her eyes locked onto mine. They were a piercing, analytical gray, the eyes of someone who measured every living thing for its utility. "Your terms for this meeting were unconventional. 90 minutes. No interruptions. 30 minutes of silence. Are you trying to intimidate me, Mr. Mitchell?" "No," I said simply. "I'm trying to communicate with you. The most important conversations happen in the silence between the words. The first 30 minutes are for you to clear your mind of the 10 other meetings you've had today and the 10 you'll have after. It's a gift of focus. The cost is the silence." A flicker of something surprise, perhaps, or amusement crossed her features, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Very well," she said, gesturing to a chair. "Let's begin your experiment." For the next 30 minutes, we sat in absolute silence. It was a different kind of silence than the one I had cultivated during my disappearance. This was a charged silence, a battlefield of wills. I could feel her mind racing, trying to categorize me, to find an angle, to regain control. I simply sat, breathing deeply, observing the city below, content in the stillness. I was not waiting for her to speak. I was simply being. This was my demonstration. The first lesson was not taught. It was embodied. Precisely 30 minutes later, she spoke. All right. Your gift of focus has been received. Now, justify it. The problem with your company, and with every company that reaches your scale, is not a lack of talent or a lack of resources, I began. Not from a prepared script, but from a place of deep conviction. It's a lack of order. You have thousands of brilliant minds, but their attention is divided into 1,000 fragments. They are bled dry by small interruptions, messages, conversations, obligations they never chose. By nightfall, their strength is gone and their purpose untouched. This is why progress feels slow. Your power is divided. She leaned forward slightly, intrigued. And your protocol is the solution? It's not a solution. It's a realignment, I corrected. It's based on a law that is as immutable as gravity. What you remove determines what can appear. You cannot command your environment until you have learned to command your attention. Your company is trying to command the market while its own mind is in chaos. For the next hour, I didn't sell her a product. I deconstructed her reality. I spoke of the law of withdrawal, not as an escape, but as a strategic retreat to fortify strength. I spoke of the law of elimination, not as cost-cutting, but as the courage to destroy the useless, to make room for the essential. I spoke of the law of focus, not as a productivity hack, but as the act of obedience to a single, definite purpose. I didn't use jargon or buzzwords. I spoke in principles. With each principle, I could see a shift in her. The analytical shield she wore began to lower, replaced by a dawning recognition. She wasn't hearing a business pitch. She was hearing a description of herself, of the lonely, focused discipline that had carried her to the top. She was a master of elimination in her own right, but she had applied it only to balance sheets and organizational charts. She had never considered applying it to the one asset that mattered most, the directed attention of her people. At the end of our time, I stood up. Our 90 minutes are up. She remained seated, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You came here with no presentation, no data, no proposal. You came here with philosophy. Philosophy is the source of all strategy, I said. Without it, all action is just reaction. I want you to do it, she said, her voice firm. I want you to implement your protocol across the entire organization. I'm giving you a blank check. Name your price. I smiled slightly. My price is not the issue. The issue is your commitment. This will not be a gentle workshop. This will be a cultural demolition and reconstruction. There will be resistance. People will call it extreme. They will say you've lost your mind. You will be tempted to compromise, to soften the edges, to make exceptions for your top performers. If you do that, you will fail. The law allows no divided loyalty. I don't compromise, she said, a steely glint returning to her eyes. I never have, and we have an agreement, I said. But we start at the top, not with the employees, with the C-suite. For the next 90 days, your entire executive team will disappear into the protocol, including you. If the leaders cannot master it, they have no right to lead it. For the first time, I saw a crack in her formidable composure. The thought of her entire executive team, the architects of corporate power, vanishing for 90 days was audacious, almost reckless. But then a slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. You've got a deal, Mr. Mitchell, she said. Let's see if your philosophy can survive the real world. The next 3 months were the most intense of my life. The forge essentially went on hold as I immersed myself in the belly of the beast. I wasn't just a consultant. I was a drill sergeant, a philosopher, a therapist. The C-suite, a collection of some of the most arrogant and powerful executives in the country, were my students. The first week was a revolt. They complained. They argued. They tried to find loopholes. The CFO insisted he needed to be available for market calls. The head of marketing claimed she couldn't possibly disconnect from her team for 3 months. They saw the protocol as an insult to their importance, an attack on their identity as indispensable leaders. Evelyn Reed was my greatest ally. She didn't just enforce the rules, she embodied them. She was the first to turn off her phone, the first to decline a meeting, the first to sit in the morning silence. Her quiet example was more powerful than any directive I could have issued. She had understood the fundamental truth: to command others, you must first prove command of self. Slowly, miraculously, the transformation began. The arrogant posturing gave way to vulnerable reflection. The scattered energy began to coalesce into focused power. In the protected space of the protocol, these titans of industry began to rediscover the purpose that had been buried under years of obligation and reaction. They started to think, not just react. They started to connect, not just network. The climax of this phase occurred around day 60. We were in a group session, and the CFO, a man named Arthur, who had been my biggest critic, stood up. His face was pale, but his eyes were clear. "I need to say something," he began, his voice shaking slightly. "For 20 years I have defined myself by my ability to be in 10 places at once, to juggle a dozen crises at a time. I wore my exhaustion like a badge of honor. Last week, for the first time in my career, I sat with a single problem for 4 hours without interruption, and I solved it. Not with a compromise, not with a patch, but with an elegant solution that will save the company tens of millions of dollars. I did more in those 4 hours than I have in the last 4 months. And I did it from a place of calm, not chaos." He looked at me, and then at Evelyn. "I've been a fool. I've been managing noise, not leading." The room was silent. In that moment, the protocol ceased to be an external imposition and became an internal truth. They hadn't just learned a new technique. They had begun a new identity. When the 90 days were over, the executives didn't just return to their jobs. They returned as different people. They moved with a quiet deliberation that was unsettling to the rest of the company. They spoke less, but their words carried more weight. They stopped attending meetings that had no purpose. They started saying no. The results were staggering and immediate. Project timelines, once a source of constant delay, began to shrink. Innovation, once stifled by bureaucracy, began to flourish. A new product concept that had been stuck in committee for 2 years was developed and prototyped in 6 weeks. The company, which had been seen as a stable but stagnant giant, began to move with the agility and purpose of a startup. The story of the C-suite disappearance became a legend in the business world. No one quite understood what had happened, but they could see the results. The Forge's phone began ringing off the hook. We weren't just selling productivity anymore. We were selling transformation. We were selling a new way to lead my revenge, which had begun as a personal quest to prove my family wrong, had evolved into something far beyond my imagining. It had become a movement. I had not just built a company. I had ignited a revolution in the very heart of the corporate world. And as I stood in my office, looking out at the city, I realized that the 90-day disappearance was never meant to be an end. It was the beginning of a new way to work, a new way to lead, and a new way to live. The man who had vanished into solitude had returned, and in his wake, he was teaching the world how to find its own quiet power. The success with Evelyn Reed's corporation acted as a catalyst, an explosion that sent shockwaves through the entire industry. The Forge was no longer a boutique consultancy. It was a phenomenon. Our inbox was flooded not just with inquiries, but with pleas. Companies were desperate to understand the secret, to replicate the miraculous turnaround they had read about in business journals and whispered about on executive retreats. We became the architects of a new corporate orthodoxy, and its reluctant prophet. With this new level of success came a new kind of challenge, one that was far more insidious than the skepticism I had faced at the beginning. It was the challenge of imitation and dilution. The market, as it always does, began to spawn cheap copies. Focus Fridays, mindfulness Mondays, digital detox weekends, a litany of superficial fixes that missed the point entirely. They were trying to apply a bandage to a wound that required surgery. They saw the what, but not the why. And it was my responsibility to protect the integrity of the work. This responsibility weighed on me heavily. I had built the forge on the principle of mastery over growth. But now the pressure to scale, to capture the market before the charlatans tarnished the message, was immense. My team was working tirelessly, but I could see the early signs of burnout. The slow creep of the scattered busyness we had sworn to destroy. I was becoming a bottleneck, the central node through which every major decision had to pass. I was inadvertently becoming the very distraction I had taught others to eliminate. The breaking point came during a strategy meeting. We were discussing plans to open offices in London and Tokyo, a move that seemed like the logical next step. David, ever the pragmatist, was laying out the financial projections. They were stellar, undeniable. Yet as I listened, a cold dread washed over me. I saw the future, a life of constant travel, of managing teams across time zones, of fighting to maintain a culture across continents. I saw myself becoming a CEO, not a creator. I saw my life being consumed by the very machine I had built. "Stop," I said, cutting him off mid-sentence. The room fell silent. "We're not doing it." David looked at me, bewildered. "John, the numbers are incredible. This is what we've been working toward." "No," I said, shaking my head. "This is what we've been running from. This isn't scaling. It's scattering. We're about to repeat the mistake of every other company that gets a taste of success. We're about to sacrifice mastery on the altar of growth." I stood up and walked to the whiteboard. The law of elimination applies to us, too. Right now, our biggest distraction is our own ambition. We're so focused on expanding our reach that we're in danger of losing our depth. I spent the next hour outlining a new vision, one that was completely counterintuitive to the business world. We wouldn't open new offices. We would close our existing one. We would transition to a fully remote, decentralized model. We wouldn't hire more consultants. We would create a self-guided digital version of the protocol, one that could scale infinitely without diluting the core principles. We would stop selling our time and start selling our system. The team was stunned. It felt like a step backward, a retreat. But as I explained the philosophy behind it, a new understanding began to dawn. We weren't abandoning growth. We were redefining it. True growth wasn't about adding more locations or more people. It was about increasing the quality of our control and the purity of our purpose. We would become smaller to become bigger. This decision, radical as it was, brought me a profound sense of peace. But it also highlighted a growing void in my personal life. I had mastered my work, my purpose, but I had neglected the other chambers of my heart. My relationship with my family had stabilized into a respectful distance, but it lacked true intimacy. My social life was virtually non-existent. I had become so adept at being alone that I had forgotten how to be with others in a way that didn't drain my energy. The universe, in its infinite wisdom, decided to present this lesson in the most unexpected way. I received an invitation to speak at a prestigious leadership conference in a small coastal town in Italy. It was an honor, but I was hesitant. The thought of traveling, of being on, of facing the adulation and the skepticism of a massive crowd felt like a monumental distraction. But my sister, who had become my most trusted confidant, persuaded me. "John, you can't just stay in your fortress," she told me over the phone. "You've learned to command your attention. Now you have to learn to share your presence without losing it. Go, not for them." "For you?" I relented, booking a flight to a small, picturesque town perched on the cliffs overlooking the Mediterranean. The conference was held in an old, restored monastery, a place that radiated a sense of history and tranquility. I gave my talk, which was well received, but the real experience happened after. When I escaped the crowds and wandered down to the small, rocky beach below the monastery, I was sitting on a smooth, sun-warmed rock, watching the waves, when a woman approached. She was Italian, with dark, intelligent eyes and a quiet confidence that was immediately disarming. She wasn't fawning or nervous. She simply sat down on a nearby rock, giving me space, but making her presence known. "You are the man of silence," she said, her voice carrying a hint of an accent. "I attended your talk. You speak of focus as if it is a religion. It's the only one that's ever worked for me," I replied, a small smile touching my lips. "My name is Isabella," she said. "I am an architect. I restore old buildings. I find that my work is very much like yours. We must first remove what is rotten and weak before we can build something new and strong on the foundation." Her analogy was so simple, so elegant, that it struck me with the force of a revelation. We talked for hours as the sun began to set over the water, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. We didn't talk about business or productivity. We talked about foundations, about structure, about the beauty of what is essential. She spoke of restoring a 14th century villa, of spending months just studying the stones, understanding the original architect's intent before she could even begin her work. She understood my restore philosophy not as a business strategy, but as an art form. She saw the beauty in the elimination, the poetry in the discipline. In her presence, I felt a sense of ease I hadn't experienced with anyone outside my family. She didn't need anything from me. She wasn't trying to get something. She was simply present. I spent the rest of my time in Italy with her. She showed me the villa she was restoring, a magnificent skeleton of stone and history slowly being brought back to life. As I watched her work, her hands moving with a practiced, deliberate grace, I saw the physical manifestation of my own principles. She was a master of her craft, not through speed or volume, but through an intimate, unwavering focus on the task at hand. When it was time for me to leave, we stood at the edge of her property, looking out at the rolling hills dotted with cypress trees. "You will go back to your world of noise and schedules," she said, her voice soft. "Do not forget the silence you found here." "I won't," I promised. "But I think I'm finally beginning to understand that the goal isn't just to find the silence. It's to be able to carry it with you, even in the chaos." She smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through the clouds. Exactly. The architect does not just build the walls. He creates the space within the walls. That is where life happens. Turning home, I felt a profound shift. The trip had been a distraction, but it had been a purposeful one. It had shown me a part of myself that I had neglected in my relentless pursuit of professional mastery. I had learned to command my mind. Now I needed to learn to open my heart. Isabella and I began a long-distance relationship, built not on constant communication, but on deep, intentional connection. Our letters and calls were not filled with idle chatter, but with shared reflections on our work, our lives, our principles. She became my anchor, a reminder that the ultimate goal of self-mastery was not to become a more efficient machine, but to become a more complete human being. The Forge continued to thrive under its new, decentralized model. The digital version of the protocol allowed us to reach thousands of people without sacrificing our soul. I had more free time than I'd had in years, and I used it not to find new business opportunities, but to deepen my relationships, to read, to walk, to simply be. The final, most satisfying piece of the revenge story fell into place a year later. My family, all of them, came to visit me in the small, quiet house I had bought on the coast, a few hours from the city. It was a simple place, filled with light and books and the sound of the ocean. My father, now a devoted student of Stoic philosophy, sat on my porch, discussing the nature of control with a calm wisdom that was a far cry from the anxious man who used to measure his worth by his children's achievements. My mother, no longer consumed by worry, was painting watercolors of the sea, a talent she had rediscovered in her retirement. And Mark was there, with his wife and children, not as a stressed executive, but as a present and engaged father. A man who had learned that the greatest leadership he could offer was to his own family. As we sat down to dinner that evening, a simple meal of fresh fish and vegetables, my father raised his glass. "To John," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "the son who taught us all how to live." Mark clinked his glass against mine. "I used to think your revenge was proving us wrong," he said, looking at me with an expression of deep, sincere gratitude. "I realize now, it was never about that. Your revenge was building a life so true to yourself that it inspired the rest of us to find our own truth. I looked around the table at the people I loved, seeing in each of them the reflection of a journey they had undertaken on their own. Inspired by a choice I had made in a moment of pain, the man they had called a failure, a dropout, an obsession, had become their quiet North Star. The revenge was complete. It wasn't a moment of dramatic payoff, but a lifetime of quiet, cascading transformation. It was the peace in my father's eyes, the purpose in my brother's life, the creativity in my mother's hands. It was the love of a woman who saw the soul behind the strategy. It was the knowledge that in disappearing to find myself, I had somehow helped everyone around me find a piece of themselves, too. The man who had vanished into solitude had returned, and in his quiet, deliberate wake, he had not just built an empire. He had rebuilt a world. The years that followed were not an epilogue, but a continuation of the same quiet rhythm. The Forge became a self-sustaining ecosystem, a digital lighthouse guiding thousands of ships through the fog of distraction. My role shifted from active commander to distant steward. I would review the metrics, of course, but my primary involvement was in refining the core principles, ensuring the message remained pure and potent. I had become the architect of the system, and like any good architect, I knew that once the foundation was laid and the structure was sound, the wisest thing to do was to step back and let the building serve its purpose. This newfound freedom allowed me to explore other chambers of my life. Isabella and I divided our time between the coast and her villa in Italy, which was nearing completion. It had become our shared sanctuary, a physical manifestation of our combined philosophies. We would spend mornings in companionable silence, she sketching in her notebook, me writing in mine. Afternoons were for work, she directing the final touches on the restoration, me on a video call with my team or refining a new module for the protocol. Evenings were for connection, for long walks and deep conversations that stretched late into the night. Our relationship was a testament to the law of focus applied to love. We didn't need constant contact or frantic activity. We valued quality over quantity, depth over breadth. Our love was not a wildfire, but a steady, controlled burn that provided warmth and light without consuming everything around it. In her, I had found not just a partner, but a mirror. Someone who reflected back to me the best version of myself. It was during one of our stays in Italy that the past reached out to me, in a form I never expected. I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was simply, a question of legacy. The body of the email was brief and to the point. Mr. Mitchell, my name is Alexander Sterling. I am the son of Richard Sterling. I am aware of your history with my father, and more importantly, of your history with his former firm, which has since floundered. I have spent the last year studying your work and the principles of the Forge. I am not writing to ask for investment or to propose a partnership. I am writing because I believe you are the only person who can understand. What I am about to do, I am about to dissolve my father's company. Not to sell it, but to dismantle it. To eliminate what is weak and redirect the resources toward a single, definite aim that aligns with the principles you have outlined. I would be grateful for the opportunity to speak with you, not as a potential client, but as a fellow student of the law. Respectfully. Alexander Sterling. I read the email twice, a sense of profound irony washing over me. Richard Sterling, the man who had represented the epitome of scattered, growth-autologous thinking, had a son who was poised to become his philosophical antithesis. The revenge had come full circle, not through my actions, but through the natural consequences of a flawed philosophy. The old way had built a house of cards, and the son was now choosing to build on stone. I agreed to meet him. He flew to Italy, and we sat at a small cafe in the village square near Isabella's villa. He was a younger, more thoughtful version of his father, with the same sharp intelligence, but without the predatory edge. He was not there to defend his father's legacy, but to understand its failure. My father saw the world as a zero-sum game, Alexander began, after we had exchanged pleasantries. He believed that to win, someone else had to lose. He built his life and his company on that principle. He accumulated wealth, but he created no real value. He had influence, but no respect. When the market shifted, his company had no foundation to stand on. It was a collection of assets, not a living organism. He looked at me, his eyes searching. You turned down his offer. At the time, he thought you were a fool. But I've studied your work. I see now that you weren't turning down money. You were choosing a different law to obey. You were choosing to build something that could outlast the market cycles. I was choosing to build something that could outlast me, I corrected. Legacy is not what you leave for people. It's what you leave in people. That's why I'm here, he said, leaning forward. I don't want to just build another company. I want to build something with a soul. I want to take the resources from my father's empire and redirect them towards something meaningful. I have a definite aim, but I am afraid of my own weaknesses. I am afraid of the distractions that brought him down. And so you seek to eliminate them before they begin, I said, understanding dawning. You're planning your own disappearance, not a disappearance from the world, he clarified. A disappearance from the noise. A withdrawal into purpose. I want to do it right. I want to build on the principles you've proven, but I don't know where to start. For the rest of the afternoon, we didn't talk about business strategy or financial models. We talked about the laws. We talked about the courage of elimination, the discipline of routine, the peace of self-mastery. I wasn't consulting. I was mentoring. I was passing the torch to the son of the man who had once represented everything. I stood against. I never heard from Richard Sterling himself. But through Alexander, I received a more meaningful form of closure. The old guard, the philosophy of scattered ambition, was not being defeated by an opposing army. It was being transformed from within. The son was redeeming the father's failure by choosing a different path. This encounter with Alexander sparked a new phase in my own journey. I realized that my work was no longer just about teaching individuals or transforming companies. It was about planting seeds for a new generation of leaders. Leaders who understood that true power was not in commanding others, but in commanding oneself. Isabella and I decided to use a portion of the Forge's profits to establish a foundation. We called it the 90-Day Foundation. Its purpose was not to give handouts, but to give opportunities for withdrawal. We would identify young, driven individuals or scientists, entrepreneurs, social activists who had a definite aim but lacked the resources to remove themselves from the noise of their daily lives. The foundation would provide them with a 90-day stipend, a quiet place to live, and a mentor to guide them through the protocol. It was our way of paying forward the gift that had been given to me. The first recipient was a young physicist from a struggling immigrant family, a woman who had a revolutionary theory about renewable energy, but was working 3 jobs to support her family. The 90-Day Foundation gave her the space to breathe, to focus, to think. By the end of her withdrawal, she had refined her theory to the point where she secured a major research grant. The second was a novelist who had been working as a bartender for a decade. His masterpiece manuscript gathering dust in a drawer because he was too exhausted to write after his shifts. The foundation gave him 90 days to do nothing but write. The book he finished went on to win a prestigious literary award. Watching these individuals flourish was more rewarding than any corporate success story. It was the ultimate validation of the philosophy. The revenge on my old life, on the person I used to be, was complete. It wasn't just that I had succeeded. It was that I had created a system that allowed others to succeed in ways they never thought possible. The final scene of this story, at least for now, took place on a warm summer evening. 5 years after my initial disappearance, we were at the villa in Italy, which was now finished. It stood as a breathtaking testament to Isabella's vision and skill. A perfect marriage of ancient strength and modern elegance. We were hosting a small gathering for the first cohort of 90-Day Foundation Fellows. The physicist was there, explaining her latest breakthrough to a captivated audience. The novelist was quietly chatting with Isabella about 16th-century brickwork. And Alexander Sterling was there too, his own company now a thriving example of purpose-driven business. He was acting as a mentor to the new fellows. His presence, a living symbol of transformation. I stood on the terrace, looking out at the rolling hills, a glass of wine in my hand. Watching this unlikely collection of people connect and inspire one another, my family was there too. My father, now a true philosopher, was engaged in a deep discussion with the novelist about the nature of narrative. My mother was laughing with the physicist. And Mark was there with his children, his face relaxed and open. A man who had found his balance? Isabella came and stood beside me, slipping her hand into mine. "Look what you built," she said softly. "We built?" I corrected. Squeezing her hand, I thought back to that painful dinner years ago, to the feeling of being a failure, to the sting of my family's words. That man felt like a ghost from another lifetime. The revenge had never been about making them regret their words. It was about building a life so full, so true, so purposeful that their words became irrelevant. It was about turning the pain of their judgment into the fuel for my creation. The man who had vanished into solitude had returned. And in his place, he had left behind a trail of light. He had not just proven them wrong. He had, in his own small way, helped make the world a little more focused, a little more intentional, a little more beautiful. And as I stood there, surrounded by the fruits of a philosophy born from pain, I understood the final, most profound truth of the 90-day disappearance. The ultimate revenge is not a life lived in defiance of others, but a life lived in complete alignment with yourself. The true payoff, however, came 3 months later. I received an invitation to a family gathering where Mark would be receiving a significant promotion, vice president of his company, the same position he had condescendingly suggested I might qualify for as an entry-level employee just 3 months prior.